So getting us ready for Pet Sunday, which will be October 13th, I'm thinking, right? I couldn't help but put this painting on the cover because it's getting us ready for thinking about enjoying our animals here in service, but also it was such a beautiful picture to me of belonging. I mean, can you imagine, and the sermon is about belonging today, can you imagine how much that dog belonged to that shepherd? And now the shepherd's died, and how much that shepherd belonged to that dog. Just wanted that image with us. So a long time ago, I had two cats. One was named Ringo Starr, and one was named Sergeant Pepper. Oh, and Ringo was a great giant yellow cat, really fat. And he was beloved by all in the hippie commune we lived in Ortana, Pennsylvania. We were a kind of vegetarian dumpster diving for food for the pigs, named Mr. President and Che Guevara. And when Ringo ran off, like cats like him often did, we made up a story about him. And the story was that he had gotten fed up with the farm and that we were all too earnest and that he had moved to Greenwich Village to be with his kind of people, where he belonged. I think he's still here. Greenwich Village has long attracted the bohemian, the outsider, the big cats who just couldn't be kept down on the farm. And that's why I find it so strange that NYU has just made the theme of its year to be belonging. They did a really big study and discovered that the main reason people leave NYU before completing their degrees or leave after they've gotten a nice job is that they just don't feel like they belong here. Belonging. The book that they're reading is called, everybody's reading at NYU this year, is called Educated by a woman named Tara Westover, who, it's a wonderful book, and she is one of those kids who was raised by a bunch of hippies who said, hippies turned right-wing, who turned out to want to do nothing but homeschool, and finally she left her version of the farm and goes out into the world to get an education because she just felt that the circle of belonging was too tight where she was, too small. So NYU comes to Greenwich Village and works on the theme of belonging, and I thought we were bohemian and outsiders. I guess those students and faculty who filled out that survey didn't get the memo about who we are here. You're not supposed to belong here. Although I know many of you are already composing your demur to what I just said, it does rather amuse me that bohemians dress pretty much the same, think pretty much the same, read the same books, and attend the same cafes. There's always been more than a little conformity attendant to the nonconformist lifestyle of the bohemian. I myself do partake. So today I am less interested in the conformities of the outsiders than I am in this whole question of belonging. So just take a moment to think. Do you feel like an insider here? Or do you feel like an outsider here? I would not be telling the full truth if I didn't say that I often feel like an outsider here. And I think that's good. Belonging is wonderful until it's not. Belonging is wonderful until a kind of groupthink takes you over, or you begin to imagine that there's no other place you could be, like my poor cat running off to to the village. I'm not going to ask you to say out loud, but I do think we could talk about it a whole lot more here. We've changed a lot in the last decade, and by the way, we also changed a lot in the decade before that, and the decade before that. And so there are cycles of belonging and cycles of participation. And so people do report every now and then that they feel outside, and they want to be inside. They want to feel like they belong here. And we still don't have a well-functioning mission statement to which you could adhere, because we've always had this culture of not wanting to do that, which makes it hard for people to feel like they belong. I understand this, and that's why I want to talk about belonging, not just because of NYU, but because of us. You know the covenantal text, especially if you're UCC. Covenant is big in the UCC, and likewise in the Baptist. But in the UCC, I remember being told if you didn't preach about covenant 5 times a year, you were out. So that's another form of belonging, right? So God uses this text biblically 4 or 5 times to 4 or 5 different groups in 4 or 5 different settings. But the main gist of it is, I will be your God, and you will be my people. You won't be confused anymore about who you are. And obviously there were rival gods or perceptions of rival gods in the early life of the Jews. The offer of this covenant with one named Yahweh meant that from now on you would belong to this version of the divine. And I really don't know why Yahweh won the lottery and was able to go on and develop all these institutions around that version of God, and then to even show up Christologically as continuing this kind of testament and this covenant. But it happened. I mean, I don't really know why Brooklyn is rivaling Greenwich Village right now to be more hip, but it's happening. I know that Brooklyn is trending, and they just don't have enough tourists yet to support their way of life. So things change. So one reason why the covenant offered by this version of God gave a unique sense of belonging right then, one reason is that it got rid of the us and them, it got rid of the lateral, and it said I'm your God and you're my people, and it was mutual between God and the human. And if you compare this beautiful thought, and if you can believe it, and I know some of us can believe it some of the time, it starts to make sense of a lot of things, including what Brené Brown in the modern testimony says. She says kind of the same thing, but in a different frame entirely. She's giving us a psychological version of the covenant. It's connectional maturity. Covenant. You're a grown-up and you belong. You can be yourself and you belong. Belonging, hear it again, is the innate human desire to be part of something larger than yourself. Because this yearning is so primal, we often try to acquire it by fitting in and by seeking approval, which are not only hollow substitutes for belonging, but often barriers to it. True belonging only happens when we present our most authentic, imperfect selves to the world. Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. We all know people who try too hard to fit in and often achieve exactly the opposite purpose they were trying to achieve by trying too hard. They're referred to as suck-ups or as people with no there. You don't want to be around them. But what if belonging is such a compelling objective to the human that we sometimes just fake it till we make it? I think a lot of people do that, and I think it's kind of honorable. Well, act like you belong, and people will think you do. It's the power of the psychological covenant your authentic, imperfect, self-embracing self, alive and real in the world, where you show up and say exactly what you feel like saying and they don't throw you out of the club. You can be real. So, what happens to a group where you're faking it till you make it? Or what happens if your whole self isn't showing up? The group literally gets bad. It gets sour. It doesn't grow. It doesn't know who you are. So really important spiritual and civic questions right now. Can you belong to Greenwich Village today? Or the United States of America today? Or travel the world and be glad people recognize you as an American? It's a really strange time for tribal belonging, really, really hard time, which puts pressure on more local forms of belonging in us, psychically. Many of us have self-deported or excommunicated ourselves. We haven't gone all the way to impeachment in these relationships with the land of our birth, the citizenship of our passports, if we have them. But we don't feel like we belong here. And when you don't feel like you don't belong, very strange things happen to you. We will sing later in the service. Oh no, it looks like we've changed it. We're not going to sing This Land Is Your Land. Whoops, great idea, Hinko. We had talked about it, and I didn't even look far enough in the bulletin to see that it wasn't there, but had we sung it, there would be a real minor key lurking in its strong major keys. Also, there is just too much evidence that the current president leads a crowd of people who are scared stiff that they don't belong here either. Why else would there be so much otherizing, telling young elected women of color, quote, go back where you belong? Belonging is not a small question. Personally, many of us really do want to belong to something, somewhere, authentically as ourselves in a welcoming world. And institutionally, it is not an accident that hospitality and diversity, welcoming, are the major themes at NYU and at Judson. We are so conformist about these values. Hospitality, welcome, don't otherize, diversity. Sometimes we welcome so much that I think we protest too much. If you have to keep saying people are so damn welcome, maybe they aren't really. Thus, the repetition of the hoped for but non-existent reality. So now, you don't have to believe that analysis, but contrast with me a kind of study. The Hebrew covenanting God, I'm yours and you're mine, with Brown's marvelous psychology. Don't get me wrong, I like her psychology. She's my favorite. She says your authentic, imperfect self finds a welcoming world and welcomes the world. But one, Brown, is horizontal. And covenantal theology is vertical. I always get confused. Horizontal is this way, vertical is that way. I think you can have both, right? Covenantal theology is vertical. It implies a heaven, an above, a larger, which can also be mutual. Horizontal implies you and me, and you and me, and you and me. And it gets really hard to belong to people that you have to go to meetings with. So, belonging to God, I think, can give you the strength to be real in belonging in groups. So I spent Monday touring megachurches in Hartford, Connecticut with some students of mine. We do this at the beginning of every semester. I like to see what's trending, and I also like to see the extraordinary success some megachurches have, at least materially. I also like to hear conversion theology out loud. So listen to the values in this pastor bragging about his 12,000-member church, which was a third African American, a third Spanish-speaking, and a third Anglo or white. What about GLBTQ people? Someone asked. He didn't miss a beat. He had a well-scripted answer. Of course they're welcome. Notice the they. We welcome all kinds of sinners here. Nobody who comes here is perfect. We do pray that they will find the gospel here sufficient to help them change. So in the name of how great and diverse they are, they exclude, right? Creating a group, because how do you create a group? Make an enemy, you'll create a group. If you weren't a high school girl, I was. I know how you make a group, right? Really, her? Huh, that couldn't possibly be so. So there's plenty of evidence that megachurches provide strong sense of belonging by having outsiders, and there's plenty of evidence that progressive congregations do the same thing. Had the mainline churches not made the O&A decision, we'd already be dead, I think. We often privilege the outsider over the insider, at least in our theological orientation. That's a whole another big subject. But megachurches do it one way, and we do it another way. The human condition is confused about belonging. So there is one progressive megachurch in Hartford called Living Waters, and they have a very large dog, a sheepdog named Doodle. Doodle is always in the service and attends all the Sunday school classes and kids' soccer games. He started his Young Life, I think you know what Young Life is, an evangelical youth group, but moved on when his owner realized that he was gay and wasn't going to convert. What this kind of warm and fuzzy megachurch does is exactly what the more evangelical megachurches do. It just creates the old as the enemy. So, for example, they hand out earplugs. I brought my earplugs up, and I saw a big bowl of earplugs sitting in the foyer, and I said, what are they for? Well, in case anybody old comes and they think the music is too loud. I had to think about that for a few minutes, because here, in most of our churches, we offer hearing aids, not hearing enhancements. Anyway, I don't want to go off on megachurches, but I do think that large groups do better at belonging than small groups. It would be interesting to discuss that. So, the small idea I want to leave you with is, how do we behave in groups at our best, at mature covenantal connection? How do we behave in groups? Not everybody should be welcome in groups. They should have to behave. Bullies, people who spend a lot of time. I love it that the harm reduction group keeps the rumors going. There is a place for rumors. But when you're in a group, to bring your authentic self is to bring your best self, and to really show up and say what you really think, trusting that other people are going to be able to accept it, differ with it, and accept it. Do you see that? That's maturity. And the power to do that comes from not being afraid of very much at all. The capacity to stand outside a group to be fully in a group but not have the group fully in you. Those are the things that are important. So if any of you see a really fat, old, yellow cat wandering around Greenwich Village wearing sunglasses, give him a cup of coffee or some bread and wine. Amen.